Sounds good? All right, let's begin then with some introductions. Luke, would you like to start?
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Kelly. So, hello everyone. My name is Luke Wade. I am the Wilderness Risk Director here at Manitowish. A bit about myself, he, him pronouns. I am originally from Maine. I've been working in outdoor ed in one capacity or another for well over a decade now, for a decade and a half, actually. I have done just about everything from running a high ropes course to leading canoe trips in both northern Minnesota as well as Ontario, to working at another YMCA camp, to working at front country outdoor education programs, and a whole bunch of other stuff in between. I am really excited to be here. Manitowish is a place that has been on my radar as an outdoor educator for a long time. I have had the good fortune of crossing paths with several Manitowish alumni, and this has always been a place that I've kind of looked towards as a really good place to be in the outdoor ed world. And I'm really excited to be here. And with that, I'm going to pass it off to Kelly.
All right, my name's Kelly Huber. I'm the Outpost Program Director for this summer. I grew up as a Manitowisher. My family does the Memorial Day work weekends, and then I was a camper all the way through. I did Outpost all the way through, and then I worked here for 4 summers, mostly as a counselor. After that, I moved to Oregon, and I spent the last several years working for a couple different wilderness tripping organizations out there, along with some nature education programs. Most recently, I led trips for and managed the gear rental facility at Oregon State University. But I'm super excited to be back in Wisconsin, back at Manitowish. It's the lake just melted, the ice is gone, and I'm so excited to set everyone else up for an amazing summer full of trips. So with that, let's get to the part that you are really here for, which is what this trip is going to look like, starting out with what it will be like as soon as you get to camp. So day 1, you get to camp on June 28th. You arrive, your trip leaders will meet you, you'll meet all your trip mates. You get to know each other some, and then you'll do the swim challenge. The swim challenge is going to be the same as it's been every other year that you've been at Manitowish. So that's pretty much your first day. Your second day will most likely be meeting with the leadership team that we have here to do a whole day of facilitation. This is to help your group grow as a team so you can be a solid unit before you even get on trail. The day after that, you're going to be doing your food pack out, where you work with your trip leaders to pack out all the food you need for the trip, as well as for the resupply for the second half of your trip. And then you're going to get to test out and check out all of the gear that you're borrowing from Manitowish. So this is things like probably the backpack, tents, cookware, things like that. You're going to pack all that up. The last day that you're going to be here at Manitowish is you're going to do the shakedown. So that's going to be a day where you actually pack everything up into packs and get to feel out and test your gear. And then you're going to get trained on some more technical skills. The Western is a more technical backpacking trip than you've done before with Manitowish, if you've done other ones with Manitowish. So you're going to learn how to do river crossings and navigate scree fields. They're going to work with you to give you all the knowledge you need to do those safely while you're on your adventure. Before we move on, let's talk about the traveling portion of this, where you travel out west. So after you spend those about 5 days in camp, on the 2nd of July, you're going to depart camp in a bus to drive out west. By the 3rd, you're going to arrive in Cody, Wyoming, where you will spend some time to get some last-minute supplies like white gas, fishing licenses if you want to fish, those kinds of things. And then you're going to camp overnight there. After that, on the 4th, the next day, the groups will split up, and there's 3 different locations that we're going to. I'll talk a bit more about that in a little bit, but they split up and they travel separately to those trailheads. Then you spend those 24 days out on your trip, getting those steps, seeing those epic views. And then on the 27th of July, you will get picked up from wherever your trip is ending, and you drive back to Cody, Wyoming, stay overnight there again, do some decompression, get ready to transition back to modern society. And then on the 28th, you're going to drive back to camp on the bus, arrive very early in the morning on the 29th, and start that unpacking process, start cleaning your gear. On the 30th of July is going to be the paddle slash hiking for you all, where you get to see your friends and family for the first time in a month or so. And there'll be a slideshow presentation at the end. It's going to be great. And then the next morning you head home. So that's just a rough overview of the dates and travel time for everything. Let's go a little bit more into where you're actually going. So there are going to be 5 Westerns this year. There are a lot of you in this webinar right now, and you can see why. There's 5 trips. One of them will be going to the Bitterroot Mountains in Idaho. 2 of them will go to the Beartooth Mountains in Montana, and 2 trips will go to the Wind River Range in Wyoming. All 3 of these mountain ranges are part of the Rocky Mountains. They have very similar challenges and features to each other. I have been in all 3 of these mountain ranges. They're phenomenal. I couldn't choose between them. So no matter where you end up going, it's going to be a really great time, I promise. One other note about location. So the Westerns have some of the most complex logistics of any trip that Manitouche puts out. There's a lot of moving parts. And so participants will be finding out what location they're going to the day they arrive at camp, because we have lots of things that we are changing around in the meantime. So we won't be able to tell you that until you get to camp. All right, let's go back to Luke, and Luke is going to talk a little bit about what daily life will look like on trail.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kelly. So, hello again, everyone. My name is still Luke. So, as Kelly mentioned, our Western trips are pretty spectacular and also very unique among the types of trips that we run. Between our sea kayaking trips and our canoeing trips, those do not tend to get nearly as much time going up and down hills, even though it might feel that way on a portage sometime when you're under a canoe. So the first thing that I think comes to everyone's mind as we look towards some of these Western mountain ranges is the altitude. We have trips that are regularly traveling anywhere between 5,000 and 8,000 feet, and it is not uncommon for trips to get above that. I believe looking back through some of our previous trip logs where our trip leaders plan out the altitudes they're going to be traveling at, that we have had some trips get up to around 10,000 feet. But that's kind of where we cap out. What that means is that you'll encounter just about every sort of weather. It will be July, it will be August, and there will be snow up in those mountains. You get to encounter lakes and rivers, and they will be very cold. But when it is 80, 90 degrees outside, that can feel incredibly refreshing. The travel through that environment is both very technical and also very interesting because you get some of the hands down best views in the world, which frankly is true of all of our trips. But some of the vistas you get when you're up at altitude or when you take a base camp day, go summit a peak, are really, really spectacular. So for addressing both the altitude as well as traveling through some of the different terrain, which involves traveling through loose rocks known as scree fields, as well as river crossings, we do some pretty extensive training with our leaders for each of those separately. All of our leaders have their Wilderness First Responder certifications. I have that as well, as does Kelly, and that has a focus on all sorts of risks that might be encountered while our trips are out in the field, including some of those signs and symptoms of altitude and how that can impact the body. With the altitudes that we're going to, we don't expect any of the really severe stuff that you generally have to get to at least 12,000 feet for things like high altitude cerebral edema and pulmonary edema. We're not expecting any of that, but some of the more common symptoms that people will tend to encounter, you will get dehydrated much, much quicker. So you really need to stay on top of your water. You will get winded much quicker. It's not uncommon for some people to get headaches. So being really aware of your own body and also being in touch with your leaders about where you're at. Yes, this is an awesome trip. Yes, you get to go be a part of that. And being a part of that means taking care of yourself and communicating with your leaders where you're at and what you need. For some of that travel through the scree fields, the river crossings, along those beautiful vistas, that means that groups will be traveling generally anywhere between 2 and 8 miles a day. For those of you who might be cross country, track, participate in sports, or go hiking out on your own, 2 miles might not sound like a ton, but when you are moving slower at altitude to allow yourself to acclimate, when you are traveling across more technical terrain, when you're learning those skills from your leaders, that is a pace that you're still going to encounter a fair amount of challenge, even if you're not necessarily covering as many point-to-point miles. Generally, those higher mileage days that are closer to the 7, 8, 9 mile range are when you have a really nice trail that you can just crush a lot of miles along. But shorter mile days are not. And our leaders also work in a few off days for things like resupplying, for things like just letting everyone acclimate and seeing where the group is at, and also for getting the most out of your trip beyond just that physically challenging aspect. Weather that you're going to encounter out there, as we mentioned, and as you can see, snow pretty much everywhere when you are in some of those really spots. Thunder is not uncommon. The way that weather systems, I'm not going to get super into it now, but the way that weather systems are impacted by the height of some of these mountains is really interesting. So you will get everything from hot sunny days to cloudy overcast to rainstorms and everything in between. You're also going to see some really fantastic wildlife. Having been through these ranges as well, you get all sorts of stuff. You get mountain goats, you get bighorn sheep, you get all sorts of birds, eagles, hawks. If you are someone who's into fishing, there's some really good fishing up in those mountains because the area is so secluded and you really have to work to get to some of those more secluded lakes, rivers, and streams, things like that. The other piece of wildlife that is not uncommon out there is that you're traveling through bear country. What that means is that on our trips, everyone will be carrying bear spray, everyone will be carrying bear whistles. You're going to be constantly singing and talking to make yourselves known. And you're also going to be storing your food both in bear resistant containers and doing your food storage and cooking away from camp. These are guidelines that we work pretty closely with the U.S. Forest Service on making sure that we do a lot to mitigate that risk, and that your leaders are also very aware of. So that's a risk that we are aware of and that we do a lot to mitigate. So I want everyone to be aware of that and also know that, yeah, you're traveling in the area where all those wildlife creatures live, and that we want to make sure that we treat that area well. And then finally, water access. Our leaders are really intentional about planning this as they go along. As I mentioned, lakes, rivers, streams. We carry a pretty thorough water filtration system that we've worked with the CDC on to make sure that we're catching everything that we need to while we're filtering that water. And if you are traveling through an area where maybe you don't have a water stop at the end of the day or during the day, you're also going to be carrying dromedaries so that you can transport the amount of water you need for cooking, drinking, washing, things like that with you. So be aware of that. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to Kelly.
Thanks, Luke. There was just one more thing I wanted to touch on about the weather and everything in those areas. We have a lot of resources back here at camp. Part of both Luke and my job is to be like an active team responding to anything that Trips Out on Trail might need. And part of that for us is tracking wildfires as well as big weather systems in the area of all of our trips, especially the Westerns. So just if that is on your mind, know that that is something we are also aware of and we pay close attention. We have check with rangers, we have contacts out there as well as on various different web resources to follow those and make sure that our trips are not going to get themselves into a dangerous situation unawares. Okay. So now that we've covered a lot about what the trip itself will be like, I want to touch shortly on what the re-entry process is like. So this is it's a long trip. It's a long time away from home. It's a long time in the wilderness with not a lot of other people. And it's an epic adventure. It's truly amazing. You learn a lot about yourself and how you can interact with the world in general, but it can be a little challenging to transition back to that day-to-day life at the end of that. And I just want to, before you even go out on this trip, I want both participants and parents and guardians to be mindful that that process can be a little challenging and it can be overstimulating and overwhelming to be back with so many people and things and moving parts. And then, if you have to go do soccer camp right afterwards or something like that, that can really affect a lot of people's moods. So I want to just front load, being gentle with yourself or with your participant on the flip side of this whole adventure, because it's an amazing experience, but it ends better if we are intentional about how we come back from it. All right, I'll leave that there for now. We can talk more about it in the future, but that's where we'll leave that. And let's move on to the packing list. So I hope you all have found the packing list for the Western already. It's on our website. It's extremely thorough. There's a lot of information on there about different brands that we advise that you take and all sorts of things. But we wanted to go over some key points, just because it's a lot of some of these things are things that people forget about or have questions about. So starting out with the government issued ID or copy, you are not leaving the country, but it's really important for you to have some sort of ID with you. A passport works honestly really great, but if you are not comfortable bringing that, or you do not have a passport, state ID is totally fine as long as it is current and it meets real ID qualifications. Moving on to the cold weather gear. So your rain jacket and pants, those ideally are made of Gore-Tex or a similar 3-layer waterproofing system. You need to have really good waterproofing for this trip. So keep that in mind. You also ideally are going to want a rain jacket especially, but rain jacket and pants that can fit over all your other layers, because if you happen to be in a snowfield and it's really cold and it's also raining, you want to make sure that you can have all those layers built up to keep you insulated as well as dry. Moving on to your layering system. So the layering system should be familiar to all of you. If you have any more specific questions about that, please feel free to reach out. But the base layer, mid layer, fleece, puffy system is works just as well here as it has in some of your other trips. If you did the Isle Royale before, I will say this trip tends to be a little bit cooler than that in the evenings at least. So just keep that in mind. The IR is one of our warmer backpacking trips. For the puffy jacket, we highly advise that you have a synthetic fill puffy jacket. This is also going to be true when I talk about the sleeping system for your sleeping bag. Synthetic fill doesn't pack down as nice, but unlike down, it stays warm when it is wet. So if you have a nice compactable, fluffy down jacket, as soon as that thing gets wet, you will be cold. So just keep that in mind. We do highly advise synthetic down for those. Moving on from the layering system, let's talk about trekking poles. I don't know if any of you have used trekking poles in the past on backpacking trips, but they are extremely useful and I would say almost necessary for the Western in particular. Some people really don't like them, but I would still say to bring them because for the terrain that you're in, they're really important. They are a crucial element of the technique that you use to go across with river crossings, as well as navigating some of those scree and boulder fields. So trekking poles, make sure you have good ones. We also do suggest with trekking poles, you can kind of get they're collapsible, right? And you can get two systems to collapse it. Some of them twist to collapse and unclasp, and some of them have latches that close. We highly suggest the latches ones because the twisting ones sometimes just untwist as you're using them, and it can be kind of annoying. Moving on from trekking poles, one of the most important pieces of your gear is, of course, your hiking boots. You want those to be super sturdy. They need to come up over the ankle. You don't want them to be crazy intense. These do not need to be heavy duty mountaineering boots. That's not the trip you're going on. Those are too much, but a solid pair of hiking boots is crucial. Gaiters. If you haven't used gaiters before, they're really useful when you're traveling through brush, especially even when it's not raining. Those things stay with water all the time. So gaiters are great. If you already have a pair that's made with a zipper, that's totally fine. If you are purchasing them, we do suggest using Velcro or snaps just because we can fix that in the field in a way that fixing a zipper is really challenging. All right, let's move on to your sleeping system. So your sleeping bags should be about 15 to 20 degrees. If you run cold and you want a colder rated sleeping bag, that's totally fine as well. We do suggest, 15 to 20 degrees in synthetic fill. We do suggest a sleeping bag liner because that adds just an extra layer of warmth. And it also means that your sleeping bag stays cleaner on the inside. It just improves the longevity of the bag in general. So sleeping bag liners are great. Sleeping pads. Sleeping pads are, you really want one that will not deflate is the first thing. It's really tempting. A lot of sleeping pads on the market these days are ultra light for backpacking, and those are really great, but they also tend to not be very durable. So just really make sure you're going for durable with those. because sleeping pads are a really crucial part of your sleep system in an insulation capacity. It's not just, oh, I will be uncomfortable lying on the ground without this. That's one element. But most of your body heat when you're sleeping gets sucked into the ground in that heat transfer. So the sleeping pad prevents that from happening. So get a good sleeping pad. Moving on from the sleep system, let's talk about stuff sacks. So there's lots of opinions either way between if you want to have a compression stuff sack to store your clothes and such in, or if you want just a regular stuff sack. There's arguments for both sides. Compression stuff sacks make things smaller, but they also tend to be more dense and a little harder to pack in your bag. Whereas the regular stuff sack tends not to go down as much, but is a lot easier to kind of squish in corners. So figure out what system works best for you. And either way, you'll probably be successful. I do suggest bringing a compression sack for your sleeping bag, just so it doesn't end up being enormous and take up half of your pack. Also, another note on stuff sacks is they do not need to be dry bags, but a thinner, lightweight dry bag is always a decent idea when there's rain and water about. So just something to think about. Bug shirts. If you haven't already had a bug shirt on a trip before, which I'm not sure if you would have had an opportunity to, they're basically a windbreaker that has mosquito netting that covers your face in like a zipper. They're phenomenal. I usually have bought them in the past where they're a little too big for me, so that if there are a bunch of flies and mosquitoes around, I can tuck inside and eat inside of my jacket. Bug shirts, a great choice to bring if you do have the opportunity. The bugs on this trip are not the worst usually that we've seen in compared to some of the ones higher up in the Arctic, but they can still get pretty nasty. So bug shirt is a great idea. Moving on to some of the optional items. So camp does supply backpacks, but if you have one and you want to bring your own, that is also totally fine. We tend to have people use backpacks that are around 85 liters. So if you do bring one with you that you want to use, it will have to be about 85 liters, and your trip leader will look at it and assess if it's actually going to meet the needs of the trip. And if it isn't, we'll keep it in storage here for you until you come back and you can borrow one of ours. But that's an option for you if you would like. Other optional items are fishing gear. If you really are into fishing, there's a lot of good fishing opportunities. And I think I mentioned earlier that the trip leaders will help you get fishing licenses in Cody, Wyoming. And a sit pad can be really nice. Sometimes there's just nowhere comfy to sit, or the ground is cold, or it's snowy, and just having something small to sit on can be really nice, and hopefully doesn't take up too much space in your pack. Onto some comfort items. So comfort items can really affect your experience on these trips. It's usually something that just makes you feel better or gives you a way to process everything you're going through. I know that I did a Canuck, and on my Canuck, I journaled for the first time in my life, and I look back on that journal extremely fondly. Another way to have some sort of processing comfort gear is you're bringing a camera. I also look back on those pictures. Both of those are really great options. Other comfort items that people have brought are books or Kindles. That can be a great solution. A lot of people will bring a book that they'll share amongst the whole group. So that's always a lot of fun. People have been able to bring instruments on these trips. The world is your oyster a little bit on this, as long as it's something you're willing to carry. If you have questions about a specific item that you want to bring, feel free to reach out to us. Or just like with the backpack, you can bring it to camp, and if it ends up not suiting the trip, we'll just keep it in storage for you until you come back. All right, moving on from what to bring for a moment, let's talk about some pre-trip preparation. So this is not the in-camp pre-trip preparation we were talking about before. This is for you leading up to the trip. We have about 2 months until you all are coming to camp, and it's a kind of intense backpacking trip. And so a lot of people get really concerned about how can I physically prepare to be ready for this trip. And what we want to tell you is, yes, you should be active. You should do some cardio that really helps with the altitude. But we really don't want you to push yourself too hard. One of the worst things that I can imagine happening is that you are training for this trip and you go pushing yourself really hard and you get injured and then you can't go. So be gentle with yourself. Doing non-impact exercises like biking, yoga, walking. If you feel like you want to put on a backpack and try it out, go for it. Just don't fill it with rocks, So lightweight exercise, but regular exercise, if that makes sense. Another thing is you really want to break in that new gear, especially things like those boots. Those boots really should be broken in before you get here, or you will regret it the first week or so on trail when your feet are full of blisters. So break in that new gear, and while you're doing it, really think intentionally about how you're going to use all of it. You know, you have the gear that you're going to use during the day and the gear you're going to use in camp. And if you have an item that you think you would want to use for both of those times, maybe reconsider and just bring two of that item because it doesn't cross over well usually. Um, Onto some more mental prep. So this is where I'm going to talk directly to you, the participants, more than anything else. You know, these trips are they're crazy. They're really cool. You're out on this really cool adventure, and you have a lot of time to think, and just figure out your life a little bit, and figure out all these new people and places and things. And I think it's really important to think about before you get there. How can you be kind to yourself while you're on the trip? So this can be, you know, thinking about those comfort items I just talked to you about, or it could be something silly like I know a lot of people will send themselves a pair of fresh socks on the food resupply because what's better than being 12 days into the trip and all of a sudden you have a fresh pair of socks that you get to wear. That's phenomenal. So just think about what can you do, what works best for you that could give you a little bit of comfort while you're on this trip. Another thing I want you to think about is what should you bring with yourself more figuratively to build that community with your trip mates when you get here? What attitudes should you come with? What communication skills can you use to form those relationships and build an experience that everyone can enjoy? There's not really any bad answers here. It's just something to think about as you're preparing and breaking in that new gear and driving up to camp, just coming in with that energy so that you can have just the most amazing experience ever. Okay, I'll leave you with that thought. And let's talk about some upcoming communications. So, just as a reminder, June 28th is opening day. July 31st, sadly, is closing day for you all. I made a mistype here. I'm so sorry, but July 30th, not the 31st, is the paddle hike-in. So that's when all the friends and family can come. They come down to the waterfront, you all hike in, and they welcome you home with break up the oars. It's going to be a magical moment. It always is. And for parents and friends and family, we will be sending a note with some more information and an RSVP about that within the next week or two. So keep an eye out for that communications. Another thing that I would like you to look out for is any emails from Camp Docs in case you missed anything or we have anything else we want to add in there. Another note about Camp Docs is where there's a lot of information about trip insurance, especially for these longer trips. We highly suggest that you get trip insurance. No one wants to think about anything bad happening, but it does sometimes, and trip insurance can just kind of cover your feet in that situation. So if you have any questions about that, please contact Karen Christofferson here at camp. She is incredibly knowledgeable about that. All right, with that, that's the end of our presentation, and we're going to launch into some questions. So let's just make sure we're not talking over each other, but if you have any, this is open forum time to go.
Hi.
Somebody,
Hi. I just had a question. What did you say about the sleep pad? I heard the durable part, but did you say the inflatable tend to break, or I missed that?
Yeah, sorry. I realized what I said could have caused some confusion. You want you want an inflatable sleep pad for backpacking most of the time. People do bring foam ones. They're just a little bulky and obnoxious. You have to carry them outside of your pack. So it's honestly fine. I've gone on trips with just foam pads, but if you can find a nice durable inflatable one versus one of the ultralight ones, if it has the word ultralight in it, it probably isn't suited for this trip, is kind of more of what I was getting at.
Got it. That makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah. If you're more comfortable, you can write a question in the chat as well. Wow, I expected more questions. Oh, here we go. Camera, no, obviously no phones. Tips. Yes, you can bring cameras on the trip. They can be disposable if you want, or digital cameras are perfectly allowable. It has to be something that you are comfortable getting broken if that does happen. It is an intense trip. You can't bring any phones. We do have other ways to communicate with the trip leaders throughout the time. We have a multitude of different avenues of communication with them. But yes, cameras are perfectly admissible. I think I mentioned that you can bring a Kindle if you would like to. That's fine too, as long as it doesn't connect to the internet. I hope that answered your question.
I've had really good luck with on trips is a disposable waterproof camera. You can get them for not a ton of money. I've usually seen them in the $20-$25 range. They come in a hard case. They're waterproof. They take something like 28 pictures, I believe. So you get a picture every single day of the week. That's something that I've had good luck with if you don't want to worry about an expensive digital camera or anything like that.
Yes. For those listening, the question was how many leaders are there for each trip? There are 2 leaders for each trip, yes. The question is, how often have there been major injuries? It's we haven't. Well, let me pause for a second to think about the answer to this question. um, I would say that major injuries are not a super common occurrence. We try to be really careful about risk management. The trip leaders go through a ton of training on that, and most I yeah, I don't have the statistics off the top of my head. I haven't looked into that at all, to be perfectly honest. But when I was looking back through old trip logs and things like that, it's pretty unusual for someone to be injured enough that they need to be evacuated off of a trip. Um, I would say some evacuations tend to be to like someone being ill or something like that, but there's not that many in a summer at all, if any. So
Yeah, injuries are pretty uncommon. We try to take a much more proactive approach to our risk management. So we really try to prepare for the worst, hope for the best, and do a lot to set our leaders up for not getting into situations where major injuries are going to be a like occurrence. That includes everything from discussing different risk management and assessment models to also making sure that leaders are prepared in case anything does happen, but we really try to prevent any major injuries rather than just reacting to them. And that has put us into a pretty good place in that they are pretty rare. For updates while groups are on trail, we'll generally have 3 significant updates. That is when our groups make it from here at camp to when they're just about to depart on trail. We'll make that known to everybody. When our groups get their resupplies, so depending on the group and where they're going, that resupply might get dropped off at a trailhead. We have one that's getting horse packed in, and then we have one that might be at a trailhead or might get flown into the group, depending on what route the leaders are looking towards as they get through that planning process. So that resupply is generally our second check-in. And then we'll also receive a third set of updates that we'll share out to with everybody when our groups get back off of trail and start their journey back to camp. And then, of course, we'll let everyone know when our campers and our groups make it back to camp as well. So those are kind of our major update points.
The question is, what time will the paddle-in be for families to come to camp? People will start arriving. We'll send out a more detailed schedule and everything later, but people will be welcome to start arriving at camp at 4 p.m. on July 30th. The question is, how many people will be in each group? The group sizes, oh my gosh, my light turned off. The group sizes will be, it depends. Some of it depends on the permitting of each area, but we're looking at a range of 4 to 7 participants in each group plus 2 leaders. Probably. That might change.
All right, it looks like people are starting to head out. I know just that we just threw a lot of information at everybody in the last 45 minutes or so. So please roll that around in your minds. If you think of any additional questions, be they large, small, or somewhere in between, please feel free to reach out, email myself or Kelly. We love talking about this sort of stuff, whether it is food, timing, weather, anything and everything. We love getting to talk with you all about this. So please feel free to reach out if you come up with a question tomorrow, a week from now, 2 days before you arrive at camp, whatever it is. Please feel free to reach out if any questions come up further down the road.
There was one more question about trip insurance. We find it from an upcoming email. There is information already on Camp Docs about trip insurance, and we were not planning to send out an email about trip insurance. If you contact Karen Christofferson at Manitowish, she has as much information as you could possibly want about it. So I would suggest reaching out to her with any questions. Luke and I are not quite qualified. Right. The question is how many girls and how many boys trips. Currently, we are looking at 2 boys trips and 3 girls trips.
All right. It looks like we've lost about a third of our crowd now, so I think we'll go ahead and wrap it up there. As we said, please feel free to reach out with any questions that come up at any point. We love talking through this stuff. Have a great
Yeah,
night.
and we'll be, yes, have a good night. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.